Known as the gateway to the Barrington Tops, the rich farming area of Gloucester has become a popular weekend tourist retreat. However, the quiet country roads which attract the visitors have become death traps for the district's young people. In the last 10 years, more than 20 people from the area under the age of 25 have been killed in car accidents. A frightening statistic when you consider that the town's population is just under 4,500. This year alone, 5 young people have died. 3 weeks ago, 14-year-old Belinda Trotter and 18-year-old Stuart Kelly were killed and 3 others seriously injured as they returned from a party being held about 6 kilometres out of town. 2 of those who were injured were involved in another crash earlier in the evening and were being brought into hospital when the 19-year-old driver lost control and slammed into this tree. It's this latest accident which has shocked the town.
After Belinda after the accident, it was just, there had to be something done.
I feel, and I know my clerical colleagues feel the same, when you're sitting there watching someone fall apart like a smashed windscreen, what do you say to them? There's no word on earth that's going to bring that child back to life.
14-year-old Teresa Withers was close friends with the young girl who was killed. She knows all too well the pressure Belinda was under. This week, Gloucester called a public meeting, hoping to find answers to the problem which is threatening the community.
Why do I hear from a person who's coming up to Gloucester, I won't name that person, but saying to me how surprised they are to find how many adults are consuming alcohol to excessive extent in Gloucester.
We can't educate our kids to an attitude of responsibility and to be responsible for their actions. We might as well forget the whole of this coming along tonight. We've totally wasted our time.
It's really hard, not to be influenced by them because we see them having fun and there's nothing else for us to do if we're not interested in sport, because it's like Gloucester is basically a sporting town.
There are no easy answers. Most agree there is little for teenagers to do in the town.
Nothing other than sport for young people to do after dark, and consequently they're left with their own devices to make their own entertainment. As you can see from that accident that we had here, there is a proportion of them are going out and forming their own parties in remote places, doing a lot of drinking, doing a lot of rather reckless driving, and ending up with the tragic results we had here 2 weeks ago.
But that isn't the only reason why the accidents occur. The locals also blame the lack of official driver training education.
The majority of young people are taught in one location only, and so they go out into another and they're virtually unskilled, having been taught mostly the bad habits of their parents.
Combine this with alcohol, which according to teenagers is freely available, and you have a lethal combination. A steering committee comprising parents, teenagers and service group representatives has been formed to look at organising a driver training scheme. It's a problem which can't be solved overnight, but the community is determined to prevent any more young lives being lost senselessly on the roads.
And luckily enough, we've realised that it's a stupid thing to do, and we're just hoping that people will listen about this and learn the lesson that we learned.
The tuna migrate through 2 oceans, from South Africa past Indonesia to the rich fishing fields off eastern Australia and Tasmania. One mature fish is worth $2,000 on the Japanese market. It's an ecologically fragile but multi-million-dollar industry, and Australia is looking for a bigger cut of the takings. Japan will pay nearly $7 million for the right to fish our waters next year. Vessels like this one can go to sea for up to 12 months at a time. They set lines up to 30 kilometres long, with as many as 3,000 hooks set at specific depths. Japan dominates the trade, but this year they've had their quotas and boats cut. That's the official line. A number of Japanese boats are currently transferring their registration and licences to work under the Australian flag. The Sharon 1 and its sister ship, soon to arrive in Newcastle, are among them. A trade-off of the arrangement is that these vessels should be crewed partly by Australians. Of the 16 crew on board this vessel, only one is an Australian. The longliners are likely to stay in port until their fishing licences are granted. Andrew Lobb for NBN News.
At peak capacity next year, the hospital will have 500 beds and 1,500 staff. Though surveys show the 845-space car park is adequate, it means staff are not guaranteed a parking spot.
Not on site, Rebecca. There's no teaching hospital anywhere in the world that provides parking on site for all of their staff.
Already medical staff on orientation tours have been told they may have to park in Ridgeway Road and other streets across the busy highway. This has prompted residents to organise a public meeting with the health service later this month.
The executive who has the day-to-day administrative role of looking after the hospital is saying that there will be a problem and there will be a spillover of parking, whereas the hospital authorities are saying there won't be a problem. We need to find out just what the true facts are.
But the facts seem to be in conflict. Though Area Health Service boss Dr Owen James says the John Hunter has more parking spaces than other teaching hospitals, he does recommend staff use public buses to and from work. And while he says the site has plenty of room for more parking if the hospital expands, the superintendent says any extra money would be better spent on patient care. Rebecca Skinner, NBN News.
If 44-year-old Karen Uznansky looks remarkably happy for someone facing surgery, it's understandable. She's about to undergo a procedure she hopes will end her daily need for insulin, end the ravages of diabetes, which has cost her her kidneys, the sight in one eye, and her independence.
Like, I won't even walk up to the grocery store because I've passed out in the grocery store twice already.
We're trying to replace the islets that have been destroyed, the cells that produce insulin in the pancreas.
Our hope is that this will replace insulin therapy as a therapy.
The idea that surgery might hold the key to insulin-dependent diabetes seemed far-fetched even a year ago. Today, several teams of researchers are working to perfect a technique that could stop diabetes in its tracks. The operation itself is so simple it's done under a local anesthetic. Islet cells, the insulin producers, are injected into a large vein through an incision in the abdomen. The whole thing takes only about an hour. Despite all the unanswered questions, researchers now seem confident this operation will one day be routine.
The final answer will be to be able to transplant the islets early in the course of diabetes, soon after a child develops diabetes.
That would mean avoiding the sort of serious complications Karen Uznansky has suffered since she was diagnosed with diabetes at 10. In a few weeks, she'll know what lies ahead in her long struggle.
The conference was specifically aimed at young people, which meant it featured plenty of blunt slogans and a surprise visit from the Safe Sex Ferry. However, the youth of the Hunter was conspicuous in its absence, but organisers say the broad spectrum of people that did attend will help get the message to the desired audience.
We've got a broad group of people attending the conference, school teachers, people from health welfare agencies, youth agencies. Yes, I think it will.
But that may not be enough. The seminar has found a high level of AIDS awareness among young people, but a dangerous tendency to make the age-old assumption that it can't happen to me.
Unfortunately, what we're finding out at the moment is that, yes, they do have the information, but they're not always practising safe sex.
Why is that?
I think it's "it won't happen to me" syndrome, and I think that's very unfortunate.
The
The blast was apparently sparked by an electrical short circuit and a build-up of petrol fumes in the ceiling of the Hamilton service station. At about 10:30 last night, the explosion blew out windows and the ceiling. A petrol tanker was refilling underground reservoirs at the time of the blast, but firefighters were able to contain the fire to a small section of the roof.
This crate contains more than $500 worth of Pacific oysters, and if they aren't destroyed, the grower faces prosecution. By law, the species is a noxious pest as it competes with the superior Sydney rock oyster for vital food supplies.
We've tried since 1985 to control these, and it's been physically and economically disastrous.
A breakaway group of Port Stephens oyster farmers has been fighting for years to have the oysters legalised, and yesterday was successful. Acknowledging the introduced species can't be eradicated, the state government is to allow farmers to cultivate and sell Pacific oysters to the public by the beginning of next year. But while it's now legal to grow these oysters, the state government has made it near impossible for these farmers to compete with the imported variety. To fund research into purification techniques and to protect the $40 million Sydney rock oyster industry, the state government has imposed an $80 fee on each bag sold, which means Port Stephens Pacific oysters will cost around $1.30 more a dozen than their cousins from Tasmania and New Zealand.
It puts us in a position where we're just not competitive. We just won't survive with that type of a levy.
As part of the industry shake-up, the government also wants to establish central purification plants. Although it's only early days, growers fear that could mean the end to privately owned washeries.
But there are oyster farmers that have got extensive capital investment in their purification plants, and this will be another point that we will really like to discuss further.
But while the New South Wales Shellfish Association is reasonably pleased with the restructuring, the mainstream oyster growers group believes the decision spells disaster for the Sydney rock oyster industry and will lobby the government to change the legislation. Jodie McKay for NBN News.
Last December's quake prompted Ombudsman David Lander to gear up for a stream of complaints from Newcastle. Their absence came as a welcome surprise.
The reality is that we've had hardly any pressure or any need to come. That would indicate that the authorities up here have handled the situation extremely well, that they've been sympathetic to the public, and that they've met the crisis with great compassion.
Generally, complaints from the Hunter were fewer than other urban areas, particularly against the police. Those he received were easily addressed. One of the few outstanding problems received about Hunter local councils relates to Port Stephens Shire, which allowed a 2-storey waterfront home to be built against council's own height restrictions. Instead of following the Ombudsman's recommendations to pay for alterations, Mr Lander said the council is considering removing the height limitation altogether.
It indicates that they don't know how to deal with a problem that ought to not have occurred in the first place, and that would worry me. I hope that perhaps it focuses attention on the fact that they need to up their act and their image by acting more decisively.
He has yet to decide whether to report the matter to Parliament.
You're Mr Cruikshank, are you, Bob? You're the skipper? Yeah. Your boat was the shown of thee.
If the offer to free Western hostages was a gesture of goodwill, the latest action by Iraq's ruling council is a show of strength. Very soon, Iraq will have well over 500,000 soldiers poised on the Saudi Arabian border, an aggressive response to America's military build-up in the area. In Paris, Saddam Hussein's manoeuvring was greeted with another round of rhetoric.
If he does not, then he has to be removed by force. This is evil. The things that are going on in Kuwait are terrifying. They are brutal. And most people understand that evil has to be stopped.
The early rounds of any trials event usually feature young up-and-coming surfers trying to win a place in the main contest and a crack at the sport's big names. Not so at Newcastle. Heat 1, Round 1 starred Tom Curran, twice world champion and on track for a third crown. Semi-retirement saw his world ranking plummet. Awesome talent has taken him back to the top of the ladder. A wind-blown 2-metre swell made conditions at Newcastle Beach frankly treacherous, but the ice-cool Californian was as calm as the waves were wild.
It's a bit of luck involved, so I just play it by ear, you know. If I lose, then I'm on my way to Hawaii, a little early, I guess.
He continued his blazing form in the second round with another decisive win. Newcastle rookie Jamie Lambert made a bold, if unsuccessful, showing, but is sure to benefit from the experience.
It's good to surf against someone like Tom because you got nothing to lose and you can go for it, but out there then I just didn't really get the waves.
His Merewether clubmate Craig McMillan was another to show fine form in the trying conditions. Impeccable wave selection and some radical moves in the bone-crunching shore break allowed the local boy to withstand a strong finish from Byron Bay's Craig Cornish, who also progressed to the second round. McMillan took that form into his next heat, where a second place to flashy Central Coaster Shane Powell left the pair of them just one win away from a slot in the main event. Tomorrow we'll see the trials continue and the start of the Newcastle City Council Women's Contest. Bruce Mackenzie, NBN News.
Mounting garbage in the absence of many essential services are an outward sign that all within council is not right. Outdoor workers have been on strike since Thursday over the contracting out of road and concreting works. They have now been ordered back to work by the Conciliation Commissioner, who says their action is endangering the public's health. The 400 union members are to meet again tomorrow, but Mayor Ivan Welsh has already flamed the fire.
What we would like to do, if we can, is to have our outdoor staff tender for the same jobs. It will at least show that we're competitive, and that's what we're after, a proper rate for the people of Lake Macquarie.
Internally, there are more rumblings of trouble. The council was told last night that salaried workers are unhappy about a controversial amalgamation of the health and planning departments. But it's the setting of next year's rates which is the biggest issue for the area's 62,500 residents. Last night the Mayor said openly that he was ashamed of the town clerk's report. That criticism was backed by the Department of Local Government, which said the report offered insufficient information for the alderman to work on. The result was that the decision on rates was delayed for another week. But Alderman Doug Carley, who will himself be running for Mayor next year, disagrees.
I just believe that it's just a lack of efficiency by the leadership of the council that is causing the delay.
The awe-inspiring atmosphere of Christchurch Cathedral is a fitting setting for the orchestra's last major performance. It marks the end of a particularly successful year, a year in which the simple aim was to survive. Having achieved that objective, the orchestra has gone on to secure not only government funding for next year, but an increase in those funds. Tonight, around 500 people are expected to hear the orchestra's first performance of Vivaldi's Four Seasons. The orchestra will then be joined by the University Choir and the Waratah Girls Choir to perform Britain's St Nicholas Cantata. Musical director and conductor Roland Peelman devised the programme that also features tenor soloist David Hamilton. But musical fans further north have two more opportunities to hear the orchestra in action. On Friday at Cessnock High School Auditorium, a special concert featuring a mixture of old classics and modern music will be on offer. The following night, the orchestra will play a range of popular classics in a dinner concert at the Rothbury Estate Cask Hall.